Work, eat, sleep. Work, eat, sleep. Life has a few pleasures. Some people accumulate some toys, and others acquire a little recognition. But mostly life is just work, eat, and sleep. Once in a moment of curiosity, the searcher picks up a rock and notices the pattern of layers, and yet the rock has a random shape. How did the rock come to be in this condition? And then, comparing the rock to himself, the searcher's imagination runs wild about how one lump of matter came to be a rock and another lump of matter came to be a person. Somehow the rock looked to be very old, but certainly it would take a long time for a creature as marvelous as himself to form. The searcher's mind was filled with all kinds of fantasies like explosions, colliding matter, and long, long ages of progression and advancement. But soon the searcher is shocked back to reality to understand that life is ultimately a constant struggle, and that he is trapped. It's like the searcher is in a deep pit with no way out. The searcher tries climbing out, but to no avail. The searcher realizes that he is going to die in this pit. Coming out of a cave in the pit is a large snake that the searcher had never seen before. Now the searcher knows that he is doomed, perhaps even sooner than he had expected. His natural reaction is self-preservation. The searcher runs as far as possible, but the snake continues to stalk him. To the searcher's surprise, the snake starts to speak.
"What are you doing? Don't you know that you are no better than me? You are just a part of the cycle of life. You would be doing a good deed if you allow me to eat you so that I can survive. But you will not really die. You will live on in my memory, and besides that, you will finally get out of this pit, for your spirit will be free like the gods."
But the searcher is not quite ready to swallow that idea just yet, or rather to be swallowed by that idea so soon. So the searcher continues to fight back, causing the snake to retreat back into the cave. Feeling brave enough or afraid of the consequences enough to approach the cave entrance, the searcher piles stones and dirt to completely block the cave's entrance. For the moment, the searcher feels somewhat relieved. But then he comes to the realization that he is still in the pit, and sooner or later that snake will get him. The searcher begins pacing back and forth. Once, to his great joy, the searcher sees someone at the edge of the pit. Waving his arms high, the searcher cries out,
"Hey, I don't know how I got into this pit, but I'm going to die here unless you help me to get out."
The Hindu says,
"Sir, your problem is that you are imagining that you are in a pit. There is no pit. And besides, if you are in a pit, it's because you did something very bad in your previous life. You can only hope for something better in the next life. I must not touch you. Pray to the 350 million gods. They are all around you. Surely you can find one of them that can help you."
Shocked and thinking next life, the searcher looks at the snake's cave. Filled with extreme fear, the searcher throws some more stones at the cave. The searcher turns and continues pacing, but with even more urgency. Again, to the searcher's astonishment, he notices another person at the edge of the pit, but just sitting there in a strange pose. Waving one arm, the searcher says,
"Sir, I'm suffering terribly in this pit. Would you help me to get where you are?"
The Buddhist says,
"I see that your suffering is very severe, but your problem is that you desire to get out of the pit. Stop desiring, and you will experience a state of serene nothingness like mine. Otherwise, you are doomed to a cycle of death and rebirth until you become a part of the great void.
Somewhat surprised, the searcher sits down and tries to follow the Buddhist's advice, imitating his posture. But the cave entrance starts rumbling. Rushing to the cave, the searcher piles up more stones over the entrance. The searcher returns to the faraway side of the pit and sits down, but not in the Buddhist pose. Some time later, another person comes to the edge of the pit and looks down at the searcher sitting there. The searcher looks up and asks, yet more somberly,
"Would you please help me to get out of this condition?"
Shaking his head, the Confucianist says,
"So, you have fallen into the pit. You have rebelled against your original good nature. Otherwise you would have been more careful. You must be more careful next time to live in harmony with your elders and ancestors."
In disbelief, the searcher remarks,
"Next time? I'm not out of here the first time yet."
Shaking his head, the Confucianist walks away. The searcher walks to the other side of the pit, kicking a little dirt at the cave entrance. Looking back, the searcher sees someone at the edge of the pit. The person is kneeling down and repeatedly bowing down. Walking to the other side of the pit, the searcher asks,
"How did you get out of here?"
The Muslim says,
"I follow the law of Allah. All must follow the law of Allah. You must follow the law of Allah. I will show you."
The Muslim picks up a sword and points it at the searcher in the pit. The Muslim says,
"Grab this sword, the law of Allah. If you grab it just right, and if it is the will of Allah, perhaps you will get out of the pit."
In stunned surprise, the searcher starts walking slowly backwards. The Muslim, angered, lifts up the sword like he will throw it so as to kill the searcher. But then the Muslim stands up, turns, and walks away, shaking his head in disgust. Quite dejected, the searcher just stands motionless in the pit. People come and go, passing near the edge of the pit. Lots of people have various philosophies, techniques, and customs, but no one goes out of their way to actually help the searcher get out of the pit. Once the searcher sees a Jewish person near the edge of the pit. The Jewish person begins talking to the searcher, saying,
One of our Jewish traditions is that a very special person called the Messiah will come someday. The Messiah is supposed to be sent from God to help us out of our troubles. Some people still look for the Messiah, but it has been thousands of years since he was promised. Most of us don't talk about the Messiah anymore. He's probably not coming, because our tradition must be just a myth.
The searcher does not respond, so the Jewish person turns and walks away, shrugging his shoulders. Completely discouraged, the searcher falls down into a slouched sitting position. There are rumblings from the snake's cave, but the searcher just doesn't care anymore. The searcher now accepts his fate. He thought about the Jewish person. Even though he did not have the answer to getting out of the pit, he just walked away. But then the searcher realizes that the Jewish person was in the pit too. All the others that the searcher met were also in the pit. Then the searcher realizes that everyone else's fate will be the same as his. The others only gave the searcher some advice or impossible actions to perform. At best, their remedies were inadequate, and at worst, no solution at all. Now in utter discouragement, and while there are more rumblings coming from the snake's cave, the searcher says,
"Is this quest for self-preservation and meaning worth all the false starts and frustrations anyway?"
Suddenly, the searcher sees a person like no other, yet somewhat like the Jewish person. Almost in slow motion, this unique man comes to the edge of the pit carrying something like a T-shaped beam on his back. He places the beam into the pit and actually comes down into the pit. At the same time, the snake comes out of the cave. This unique man positions himself between the searcher and the snake. The unique man instructs the searcher to climb out of the pit using the beam as a ladder. Just as soon as the searcher is out of the pit, the snake bites the unique man on the heel. The unique man instantly dies there, hanging on the beam. The snake attempts to slither up the beam, but causing an imbalance, the beam starts to fall. The fleeing snake is hit directly on the head by the unique man's hand and part of the beam. The snake dies too, as it is completely covered by the falling beam. For a moment, the searcher marvels at this most unusual chain of events, that someone would actually come into the pit to rescue him when the searcher did not care. But even more, the unique man actually took the searcher's place in certain death. And amazingly, the source of death and fear of death is completely gone too. The searcher has another chance at life, like a new life. But how shall the searcher live this new life? Certainly, the unique man that saved him could have guided the searcher in his new life. But now the unique man is also gone. Suddenly, to the searcher's utter amazement, the unique man rises from the dead. He is now unrestricted by the material world. Rising into the air, the unique man comes and stands beside the searcher. The searcher is overjoyed and humbly bows down in thanks to the unique man. The unique man lifts the searcher up and says,
"I'm going to stay with you forever."
Then the unique man blends into the searcher. The unique man says,
"I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?"
This unique person is the Lord Jesus Christ. He is like no other, because he is the very creator of all. Humankind was created in his image. Our original innocence has been marred by rebellion and ignorance. But this same one that created us also became one of us, not just to instruct us, but to become the actual bridge between humankind and God the Father in heaven. Jesus Christ's unique resurrection from the dead is historical proof of the Bible's claims. God's redemptive work is infinitely complicated, but the necessary response is to acknowledge our need of God's forgiving love through trusting in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection for salvation. At the same time, we must allow Him to guide us daily according to God's will as revealed in the Holy Bible. The question still remains:
Do you believe this? Life or death, saved or lost, heaven or hell, hangs in the balance.